A massive warm welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Today I'm joined by Garth Fort. He's the Chief Product Officer at LogicMonitor, and he's a leader whose career spans Microsoft, AWS, Splunk, and is now one of the most influential players in the observability space. But Garth has stepped into this conversation at a fascinating moment, because we're at the moment where enterprise IT is finding itself under pressure from growing complexity, hybrid infrastructure, and rising expectations around AI-driven performance. So today, I want to explore why AI native observability is emerging as the next major shift in enterprise IT, and how LogicMonitor is positioning itself for this moment through Edwin AI, which is an intelligent agent designed to cut through the alert noise, tackle alert fatigue, which we've all seen and experienced, pinpoint root causes, and automate resolution paths. And Edwin AI is not just supporting IT teams, it's helping reshape how they understand and respond to system behaviour in real time. And we will also examine what is broken in legacy monitoring tools, why traditional approaches are struggling in hybrid environments, and how IT leaders can rethink visibility and operational resilience without overwhelming their teams that are already under pressure. Garth will also share his incredible journey through some of the world's biggest technology organisations and how those experiences have helped shape his perspective and how he plans to use those experiences to drive LogicMonitor's next chapter. So whether you are navigating infrastructure complexity or questioning how AI agents fit into your operational strategy, this conversation will offer some thoughtful insights. Here at the Tech Talks Network, we now have 9 podcasts and approaching 4,000 interviews, and that is only possible with some of the great friendships that I've developed over 10 years of podcasting. And a company that I'm proud to call friends of the show is Denodo, because not only have they been on this podcast multiple times, they also help make sense of the AI data chaos that we're seeing now. Because the data world is louder than ever. AI hype, lakehouse complexity, and pressure to deliver more with less. These are things that I talk about every day on this show. But Denodo is helping businesses make sense of it all, because they provide a unified data foundation for trustworthy AI, lakehouse optimization, and data products to finally bring service to life. Simply visit denodo.com today. But now it's time for today's interview. Let me introduce you to today's guest. So a massive warm welcome to the show. For everyone listening, hearing about you for the first time, can you tell them a little about who you are and what you do?
So I've been in software for going on 30 years. I started my career at Microsoft, where I spent about 22 years there, did a whole bunch of interesting things, mostly in product, but I also spent some time in the field where I got to spend a lot of quality time with customers. After that, I moved to AWS for about 5 years and had a couple of different roles there, but I got an opportunity to, run engineering teams and learn firsthand about sort of like how observability applies at scale. Amazon, AWS specifically has about 225 globally available web services, and sort of I was responsible for a number of those, and understanding how to keep things healthy 24/7 in a global environment. Like, I really was a customer of observability as much as anything else. That prompted a move to Splunk, where I was a CPO there for a number of years prior to their acquisition by Cisco. And then I'm now here as the CPO at LogicMonitor.
Wow.
And it's a fun role. The CPO role, I've done it, this is my second sort of go round. And it's actually a really fun role, given sort of like my background. A typical day, I started the morning today on a call with our dev team in India, looking at sort of the demos of what they've delivered over the last sprint. We deliver in 3-week intervals typically. And so I spend a lot of time with engineering, but I also get to spend time with customers. I get to spend time with partners. I spend a lot of time with different functions across the company, just figuring out how the product roadmap can help accelerate our ambitions overall. So it's a great integrative role. It gives me a very varied diary, if you will. And so every day is a little bit different. And it's just a great place to learn and have an impact on the company.
I love that. And you've been on quite a journey there. Fantastic career. And one of the things that stood out about where you are now is it feels like you've stepped into LogicMonitor at a point where enterprise IT is feeling under pressure from both AI complexity and some of the rising expectations that come with that. And when I was doing a little research on you, I know you've talked about AI native observability as almost the next frontier. So what genuinely changes for IT teams compared to the monitoring models that they have relied on for the past decade? Because you've seen a lot of changes throughout your career, but what are you seeing at the moment, and what excites you, and what maybe even makes you nervous about the road ahead?
I'm less nervous. I'm more kind of excited, to be honest. So my first sort of entry into this domain, I actually ran the management and observability tools for Microsoft and their security portfolio. This was a long time ago. I'm kind of dating myself, but we had tools like System Center Configuration Manager, System Center Operations Manager. We bought our first APM tool. It was a little company called Avicode. We did IT automation through a runbook automation tool called Opalus that we acquired. So I was kind of like steeped in the old world of like traditional monitoring like 15 years ago. Fast forward to my time at AWS, none of those tools would really work at the scale we were operating at. And, Twitter had a very famous blog post in the spring of 2003 where they really coined the term observability in the industry. And their point was just like traditional monitoring tools just will not keep up with the complexity of like modern, I think Twitter only had about 100 million users at the time they were publishing this. So they were small by today's standards. But even then they kind of realized like you just can't monitor these large scale complex systems using traditional tools. Humans just can't keep up. That was very true at Splunk, where we were aggressive in adopting AI into both our security and observability portfolios. And then I took a little bit of time off where I was advising some startups between Splunk and LogicMonitor. And it just dawned on me, like, as you're talking to these young companies and watching them to start to apply AI to some hard problems that have been lingering in the industry for 20 years. It became obvious that a lot of the things that we've been talking about, like self-healing, autonomous IT, self-configuration, et cetera, these are old ideas that date back to the early 2000s. IBM, famously created a manifesto in 2001. But it's like only now with the maturity of IT, and it's still early, I will say that it just became obvious that a lot of these hard problems that have sort of persisted for decades, we're on the precipice of being able to solve them. LogicMonitor really appealed to me. I met with, Christina and the leadership team. And as I got to know them, they've really kind of embraced AI as the future of the company. They bought Dexta, which was a small startup in London in 2001. And that's really been the nexus of kind of how we built our AI strategy out. It's the basis of what we call Edwin AI today. But really, we're infusing AI into everything we do, both for customers and the tools that we provide them, and also in the way that we actually approach everything from, our legal department, how we deal with like pipeline generation with the field, how we actually like do engineering. Like we've got, pick your favorite tool of the day. We've got, Copilot and Cursor and Claude. We have just fully embraced AI in terms of what we deliver to customers, but also how we run the company. And that was really appealing to me.
And it's interesting listening to you there, how so much has changed and how so little has changed at the same time. We still have that challenge of trying to keep up. And present day legacy monitoring tools, they still dominate many large organizations, yet they often struggle to keep pace with the hybrid and multi-cloud environments that they rely on. So I'm curious, from your perspective here, what is fundamentally broken in the way that enterprises approach infrastructure visibility today? And what is there a mindset shift that maybe needs to happen before the technology can catch up? Is that the problem? What are you seeing here?
Well, I don't know that it's as much a problem. Some of the enterprises that we serve today have been around for 100 years, and they've got host-based systems. A couple of them have mainframes and large financial services. Technology moves in waves, but it doesn't like leave the old behind. And so, that's part of the complexity of modern enterprise infrastructure is it's very complex. And, when we look over our customers, all of them have a very hybrid footprint. A few of them have made like a singular bet on a single hyperscale provider. But a lot of them actually like want to have a foot in like multiple worlds. And so we support Azure and AWS, GCP, and then most recently in H2 of this year, we delivered support for OCI. And collectively, the four hyperscale providers offer over 1,000 commercially available web services. And you just think about sort of like managing the complexity of that in addition to managing your on-premise legacy environments. The data center, in spite of the prognostications that I made as an AWS employee, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, data centers still exist. And a lot of our big enterprises, for various reasons, from data sovereignty to like regulatory requirements, like they still have a very big on-premise footprint. And that's where, like, I'd say, we really got our last boost was when we sort of embraced hybrid as the new normal. And now we're using AI to really accelerate kind of how that's working. So things are not broken, but they are complex. And I don't think that complexity goes away as the world gets increasingly hybrid. It's maybe a quarter of enterprise workloads have migrated to the cloud. There's still more to go. But I think, we'll pass off the IT world to our children or our grandchildren. And I think the world will be IT or hybrid IT for the duration. And so it's, how do you manage that complexity? Most of our big enterprise customers, we surveyed about 100 CIOs recently, and they had an average of about 35 different tools across security monitoring and observability. And that's kind of the normal. What we've tried to do is come in with a set of tools that complements the legacy infrastructure, lets you monitor your existing network and data center infrastructure, lets you embrace, hybrid to the extent you want to go make a bet on a hyperscaler. But managing that complexity becomes overwhelming. We had a large healthcare company in the United States, and I was meeting with their CIO. They were dealing with, just from LogicMonitor alone, about 18,000 alerts a week. And this is a mature deployment. They tuned their alerts. They use dynamic thresholding, which we allow them to basically let the system sort of look at normal behavior and figure out what an anomaly is. And even with all of that technology, they were still overwhelmed by the volume of alerts. When we introduced Edwin AI into their environment, we took that from 18,000 alerts a week to less than 1,200. The CIO was kind of just blown away by that, because a lot of times you'll see, when you're trying to figure out what's the needle in the haystack, what's the root cause that's causing the alerts across all these related systems, AI has really turned out to be a very powerful tool for doing that alert correlation, which is the first use case that Edwin AI really went after. So I don't think it's as much. I actually don't find enterprises to be like resistant to AI. I actually think it's a place that people are looking to it as a potential solve for a lot of these problems that just are inherent in the complex environments that they run.
And as you said in your intro there, you bring experience from AWS, Microsoft, and leading Splunk through its cloud transformation. And as you begin shaping LogicMonitor's next chapter, where do you see the biggest opportunities to apply so many of those lessons in a way that feels distinct from what you've done before? I'm kind of intrigued on where you see this evolving and taking shape.
Yeah, it's a great question. I thought about this pretty deeply when I was doing the advising work. I've been fortunate to work at some of the best tech companies in the world. When I left Microsoft, it was about 150,000 people. When I left Amazon, it was 1.5 million people, employees. I mean, it's one of the largest private employers on the planet. Even Splunk was big. It was publicly traded, but still 7,000 employees when I was there. The opportunity that I thought, LogicMonitor really presented was, you have a leadership team and a board that's completely committed to embracing AI in everything that we do. That was kind of thrilling. There's nobody who's like fighting that inside the company, and we don't find our customers really resisting that as well. But part of the fun is like, how do I take these lessons learned from some of the biggest tech companies in the world and figure out how to right size it and bring it to bear on a company that, LogicMonitor is just north of 1,000 employees. The business is growing quickly. We passed 300 million in ARR. But it's taking lessons learned from the biggest tech companies in the world and sort of figuring out how to right size it and apply it to a different company that's at a different scale and a much steeper part of the growth curve, if you will.
And the introduction of AI agents like Edwin AI that you mentioned today signals a shift from reactive monitoring to something much more, not just proactive, but autonomous. So how should IT leaders think about that balance between automation and human oversight as these agents become more embedded in our daily operations? One of the big keywords or buzzwords I hear at every tech conference this year is human in the loop. But how do you see that?
Sure. Yeah, it's It's interesting. We've introduced some capability recently that is very familiar to people. Automation historically has been what we would call deterministic. It's kind of if this, then that. And that's still got a huge amount of utility in sort of modern environments. So we have this feature called automated diagnostics and remediation. So when an alert fires, you can actually run additional diagnostics on the host or the network to figure out what was actually going on. So you can do a deep dive, grab, whether it's a net trace, you want to get a heap dump or figure out what was going on with that machine, but that can be completely automated. And nobody has any resistance to that because it's very predictable. Like, if this, then that. And then in terms of the remediation, like it's just a set of scripts, like whether you're using Groovy or PowerShell or you're using, we've got integration that we announced recently with IBM, Red Hat, Ansible through Edwin. But deterministic automation is something that I think people are pretty comfortable with because, you can reproduce it. It's going to behave the same way every time you run the same inputs, you get the same outputs. And so that still has a lot of utility. And that kind of automation people are very comfortable letting that run on its own. Agents are a different thing. AI is by definition, it's not deterministic, it's stochastic. And so, you have to kind of shift away and you have to think about things in terms of, is this going to be, what's the probability from a statistics perspective that the agent's going to give you the right answer? And that's where I think people are talking about, human in the loop. You want your agent to tell you its plan so that you can have a human review it and say, okay, before you give the agent permission to run. We were with some analysts a few weeks ago and, I said something that this is kind of off the cuff, but it in hindsight kind of like resonated a lot. I think when you get to the point that your agents have as much governance as your humans today, right? People will start to trust them. But that means you got to have all the governance that you have around role-based access controls. You have to have audit logs, that's got to be auditable. You have to be able to store those things. You have to, go back in the event that something does go wrong. You want to know what happened, who did it, and why. And so you have to build a lot of this governance around these agents that has always existed for humans operating in an IT environment. But we're very early in sort of that. I believe, we've introduced a bunch of agents in Edwin AI, as you mentioned. A lot of what they're doing is actually automating fairly routine things. They're fetching data for you from related systems. They're actually going and doing, root cause analysis. They're doing correlation. Like, they're not really operating on the system and taking action. They're just helping operators get faster at their current jobs. And people are very comfortable with that level of automation. And I think we believe, like, in the next 3 to 5 years, as we start to build the right governance models around it, and it's not just going to be us, it's going to be industry consortiums, industry standards that sort of dictate this. We're embracing open standards everywhere we can. We're building our own MCP servers. We're supporting agent-to-agent protocols. And then we're building all the governance under the covers that make sure that people have confidence that their agents are actually acting in a way, that's predictable, repeatable, and actually getting the right outcome. So yeah, human in the loop is kind of I think that's a point in time statement, and people are kind of reflecting that there is some temerity on the behalf of customers to let agents kind of run amok. But I think in a couple of years, people are going to get as comfortable with, the stochastic behavior of agents as they are with the deterministic agents of kind of if then that type deterministic automation that they've been comfortable with for years.
Quick thank you to the sponsor supporting all of the shows on the Tech Talks network. And this month, I've partnered with Alcor. And if expanding engineering operations beyond your home market can be overwhelming, you're not alone. Because if you've ever wrestled with local laws, slow response times, and partners who treat each country as separate rather than part of a wider strategy, you might want to check out Alcor. They approach expansion completely different. They specialise in building tech teams across Eastern Europe and Latin America, and they combine employer of record services with recruiting, so you get one singular coordinated process. They help you choose the right jurisdiction based on your needs, run proper evaluation of candidates, and onboard teams quickly. And their model is also refreshingly transparent. Most of your contribution will go straight to your engineers, and their fee shrinks as your team grows. And there is no cost to exit if you move the team in-house at a later date. And I think that kind of clarity is why so many high-growth companies in Silicon Valley are working with them right now. So you can find out more details at alcor.com/podcast or simply use the link in the show notes. And we will have many people listening around the world that work in organizations that often talk about wanting foresight over hindsight, yet their operational culture often resists change. So what practical steps could IT teams take to make that move towards more predictive and adaptive operations without overwhelming staff that are already stretched, and some might be a bit fearful that this tech is out to replace them as well? It's a tricky balance sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. AI, I think the fears that AI is going to replace every human labor, it's a little bit overblown.
Yeah.
My oldest daughter is a senior in college. She's graduating with a computer science degree. It's interesting looking at her sort of learning over the last 4 years in university. They've embraced AI as just a way of actually doing computer science in a more efficient way. So she's had several classes that actually required, some of the teachers want to sort of make sure the students understand core concepts and they forbid the use of AI in solving certain problems. But a lot of the classes were actually teaching students how to apply AI, in a computer science context to actually make them sort of more efficient engineers. And I think that next generation, I think, is going to be much more comfortable with AI. Even in our largest customers that tend to be a little bit, maybe resistant to change, as you said, I think people are just at a point like, this healthcare company I mentioned, 18,000 alerts a week is just fundamentally unmanageable. And I think people are looking to AI with some optimism to really think about like how that's going to make their jobs a lot easier. If you talk to an L1 engineer, a level one person who's doing initial triage on this stuff, nobody likes the fact that they have this massive backlog and they can't make it through even a day's worth of work, et cetera. And so everybody wants to be better at their job. They want to get rid of a lot of the mundane stuff that they have to do, and automation actually gives you a way of like saying, yep, I've seen this problem before. I can tell you the last 5 times I saw it. Here's how we actually fixed it. And I can actually write an Ansible script to go and fix it for you. That's a real use case, by the way, that we showcased with IBM recently, where AI is the ability not just to understand the state of the systems, but to kind of understand the state of the knowledge within the organization. And so it's being fed with, Jira tickets. We have a bidirectional integration with ServiceNow, so we can see all previous tickets. We can sort of like really kind of accelerate root cause analysis by saying, hey, this is a problem that we've seen 5 times in the last 6 months. And like, here's how we fixed it each time. And then actually get you ahead of that. That's the predictive part that you were talking about. How do you make sure that if you've seen the same incident 5 times in the last 6 months, how do you make sure you see it 0 times in the next 6 months? And I think AI really kind of gives people, the promise of being able to, sort of like outsource, if you will, a lot of the mundane operations, in security and IT and engineering and, development and, DevOps, and like really kind of like let the humans focus on what they're really good at solving and let AI do the kind of more routine things that are often very, mundane and frankly boring for human operators to do over and over again.
And enterprise IT spend, that's also evolving as fast as boards continue to wrestle with AI investments, data center transformation, not to mention risk management as well. I'm curious, from what you're seeing here, especially when during the year there's been a big focus on ROI of every tech project, what is shaping IT budgets right now, and how are you at LogicMonitor aligning your roadmap with some of these shifting priorities?
Yeah, it's interesting. In economic upturns and downturns, one of the most resilient parts of IT spend is security. Nobody wants to skimp on security, and so generally those budgets have been fairly safe. You want to make sure that your enterprise is safe, your customers are protected, your confidential company data is secure, and so security tends to be fairly resilient in up cycles and down cycles, and that's been true for decades, and we believe that'll be continue to be true in the future. AI is really interesting. AI is kind of getting a little bit of a get out of jail free card. Everybody wants to be investing in AI, and so there's and a lot of our big companies, we have like specific line items that are assigned to AI before they even know what they want to do with it. As we start to introduce Edwin AI into more and more of our accounts, the interesting thing is that, the governance process around sort of like adopting AI has a little bit more friction in it than I would say traditional IT tools. I worked with a customer a number of years ago, and they had this thing they called the Technical Risk Assessment Program for all IT spend above a certain threshold. And I kind of joked, it's like, oh, you really call it the trap? Your engineers want to buy a tool, you send them to the trap, the Technical Risk Assessment Program. The procurement person thought that was a little bit funny, but we laughed about it. But it's serious. Like IT tools go through security reviews. They go, the legal team wants to look at the contracts. They want to kind of understand, like, are they signing up for any terms that are going to put the company at a disadvantage, et cetera. And all that's pretty normal in terms of IT procurement. What we're seeing when we introduce AI into these companies is even though the budget is there, the governance hasn't really been figured out. And so very often we run into customers where there's somebody on the board who actually is like an AI governance role. So it's not a person in day-to-day kind of operational role, but their job at the board level is to really understand how AI is impacting, not just IT, but every function in the company. And so there are, I'd say today, there's a lot of budget that's allocated to AI, but sort of getting at that budget, both internal to enterprises and then for vendors like us is a little bit more, it's more rigorous, and so we have to go through reviews. There's often, in addition to I would call it the traditional, technical risk assessment programs that have been around for decades, you actually have these new AI governance boards that are often, you have people from legal and finance and different parts of the company that really don't understand IT, but they're helping kind of the company navigate sort of this journey into the future. So the budgets are certainly there. When we look ahead to our roadmap over the next 3 years, we have, we'll still continue to invest, the majority of our R&D resources into the tools that people use on a day-to-day basis to run their hybrid IT. And so that's a core part of our investment, and that's not going away. But we're shifting more of our R&D investment towards assets like Edwin AI, towards things like automated remediation that I talked about before. Really kind of embracing this idea that, like, we believe automation and autonomous agents are going to be driving IT, somewhere in the next 3 years. And so that's where we've kind of, put our engineering bets for 2026 and beyond.
And there's also a growing conversation around observability, moving from just a technical function to more of a strategic business capability. So how do you see the role of the CPO and product teams evolving as observability maybe becomes central to wider business performance and resilience? Because it feels like a big moment here.
Yeah, it does. And I could make the case that that's not a new trend. Even 15 years ago when I was sort of doing what we would now call observability at Microsoft, people aren't monitoring a server, a host, a middleware component because it's fun to watch, metrics on a dashboard, right? Nobody wants to admire dashboards. It's always been in service of keeping the core business processes running. But as we embrace, we have, that this large healthcare provider, a different one that I talked about before, they're a critical path in supplying, life-saving drugs to tens of thousands of clinics and hospitals around the world. If an IT system goes down and they lose the ability to sort of like monitor the temperature of a vaccine, for even a small period of time, like a transient performance issue means that they have to throw the whole dose out because, the FDA here requires like a, really secure supply chain. And you want to make sure that, the drugs that you're delivering are, going to be life-saving and, and that requires a lot of these IT systems to be working in tip-top shape. We work with a large global hospital group that's got hundreds of thousands of properties around the world. Excuse me, not a hospital, a hotel group. And they're really focused on like everything about the guest experience, for their ability to kind of check availability and book a reservation to sort of making sure the check-in goes well, making sure the bill gets paid, and, the guests all have a wonderful experience while they're there. All of that is underpinned by IT systems. We've got a lot of large airline companies in the United States. They're monitoring all these systems from, baggage checking to sort of, getting through the security, getting your ticket, making sure the ticket's on time, making sure the plane leaves on time, and all those things, fundamentally impact business systems. So, I'd say it's maybe more critical. We've kind of embraced this. We introduced this notion of a dynamic service insight in LogicMonitor, which says, look, we have one customer that's managing well over 130,000 network devices. And, you want to make sure that packets are flowing and buffers are not overrun and all that good stuff. But, ultimately what you're doing is you're providing visibility into the process outcome. So it's what I call business process observability. And that's really enabled by this notion of dynamic service insights. So the service is actually provided by a host of infrastructure that might be running in your data center, might be running partially in the cloud, could be running at a third party, like a partner infrastructure. And so being able to make sure that the business process is healthy, that's really what dynamic service insights is about. And so you're monitoring at the service level or kind of at the employee or the customer experience and making sure that like everything is like, the green lights across the board don't mean your customers and employees are actually experiencing green lights. And so you have to move up a level in the semantic hierarchy, if you will, to monitor the performance of these services as opposed to monitoring the components of the infrastructure. And, it's maybe become more critical, but that's always been the reason people have monitored IT to make sure business processes are operating well.
And again, looking at your career journey and your new role on the present day, what would you say to tech leaders who might be listening, who are trying to future-proof their infrastructure decisions today, but also feel caught between rapid innovation and the reality of legacy systems they simply cannot walk away from? This is a topic we've been talking about for as long as we both probably can remember, but I suppose with the speed of technological change, it becomes even more important. But what would you advise here?
Yeah, it's interesting, in my career, and I think you've been around for many of these transitions. I lived through the transition to the internet, kind of in the mid 90s at Microsoft. You had the transition to search, which was just sort of a massive change in the way that we all interact with computers every day, from our phones to our PCs to our Macs. Then we went through kind of this transformation to cloud, which was huge, was led in many ways by AWS, but, every big IT company kind of followed suit relatively quickly. And then I would say, I would argue that sort of in all these transformations that I've seen over nearly 30 years, like this one with AI is happening, faster than any of the previous ones. Like the internet, if you think about it, like the internet crashed for the first time in November of 1980. Yeah. Like it was called ARPANET at the time, but it went down for 4 hours, and it led to all these like postmortems and root cause analysis, and that was actually the ISO stepped in, and we came up with industry standards that we now accept, like SNMP and other things like that. Those all originated from a crash of the internet that happened in 1980. It wasn't until 15 years later that like the internet started to become a thing that really kind of like was at scale. But when you think about AI, the world saw ChatGPT for the first time 3 years ago this month. So if ChatGPT was a human, it'd be a toddler. I mean, it's walking, it's talking, it's starting to put its first words together. But when you think about what's happened in the last 36 months, like this transformation is happening faster than just about any that I can remember. One of the things that intrigued me about LogicMonitor, we support customers that have legacy environments that, like I said, some of our enterprises are over 100 years old. And so there's always going to be legacy stuff. And I think that's what customers rely on LogicMonitor for. Like we can monitor all of your legacy stuff. We have 3,000 out of the box integrations, with products that are discontinued and vendors you might not even remember. But we still support monitoring them sort of in a hybrid environment. But like within LogicMonitor, like we've embraced AI kind of wholeheartedly. I would say for IT leaders, the risk of experimentation is pretty low. Like we get Copilot, we're using an enterprise license of ChatGPT internally. Like the cost of experimentation is very low right now. And I don't think there's any reason why you shouldn't be playing around with it today. I do acknowledge, like, even my daughter going into, her first job out of college was worried, like, is AI going to completely replace computer science engineers? Turns out that's not the case. But it's certainly like, the generation that's coming into the workforce today is coming off of an education that will be largely based in sort of AI complemented learning. And so I think that next generation is going to be much more fluent and willing to adopt. I would just say, like, you have to just embrace a learning mindset, and you really have to just kind of like, throw yourself in, start playing with it. For senior leaders, we did a fun little example. We had what we call an enterprise advisory board. So we had about 10 of our largest customers. These are senior executives, CIOs, and maybe CIO minus one. And we're all together in a hotel conference room. And we did some just fun sessions together, like playing with GPT, at a break. And it was just sort of like, some of them had never really put hands on keyboards and actually experimented with ChatGPT before. But when we got into it, it was actually kind of fun and cost us nothing. I mean, ChatGPT is free. You can buy a pro license for $200 a month, but you don't need it to start experimenting with it. So it's low cost and low risk. And then, what we've done inside of LM is we do have enterprise license for all of our employees, and we actually watch how people use it. And we look for people that are, early adopters. ChatGPT gives you the ability to see who's using it, how frequently do they use it, how many chats do they do per week, per month, et cetera. We're not using it as sort of a hard benchmark that we hold people to, but it's just, we're encouraging everybody to use it as part of their, their daily work. There's one person on my team who's just been a rabid early adopter. I think he's doing on order of 25 to 30 chat GPTs per week, different chats that he starts up on different topics. He happens to be one of my most productive product managers, just because he's so much faster at sort of like getting to the right answer, assisted by AI. But the cost of experimentation is zero.
Yeah.
So go for it.
So many great points there. And you talked about the importance of having that learning mindset, embracing it. And there is a real pressure on us all to be in a state of continuous learning now. So on a personal note here, especially at a time where everyone's starting to think about New Year's resolutions and what they're going to be doing differently, where or how do you self-educate on a personal level? And maybe it's a tip that somebody else could pick up listening as well. But how do you keep up to speed with everything?
Yeah, you and I both grew up in the era where we lugged hardcover textbooks to school every day and, big rucksacks. And, that's a different world than our children certainly are growing up in. I've got sitting behind me a library of about, there's probably 300 different books back there. So I still like reading the book. The tactile feel of a book is great. And I'm a pretty voracious reader. And this time of year is great because everybody's coming out with their best 10, best 100, like all the best books of 2025. And so whether you like fiction or nonfiction or romance or whatever, like this is a great time of the year to start building your reading list, to your point on New Year's resolution. Something I do every December is I start putting together a reading list for the next year. But just on a personal note, I've got my girls home from college this week for the US holiday with Thanksgiving. And, we've been sitting around the dinner table and different topics come up. I've got, kids from 18 to 22. And it's just fun sitting around there. And, I still have muscle memory. And so somebody will ask a question I don't know, and I'll go to Google just out of muscle memory, and I'll start kind of trying to figure stuff out. And then my 18-year-old will actually pull up ChatGPT, and she gets to a hell of a lot more refined answer in like a quarter of the time that I would get to it, just kind of doing the old-fashioned search way. And so just, I actually have found ChatGPT is just such a great tool for learning and research. Our family's recently we're a Seattle-based family, so we're really big into our coffee, and we just upgraded to a new fancy espresso machine and all that fun stuff. But as we've kind of been learning about how to use this machine and just, become better baristas at home, ChatGPT has been indispensable in the last couple of weeks in teaching all of us to learn how to brew better coffee. That's a small kind of trivial example, but, I'd say it applies to almost any new topic that you want to go learn. ChatGPT is just one of the most, fundamental. And it's not just ChatGPT. There's Gemini. There's a whole lot of other tools out there, but it's just such a fun way to learn and explore new topics and do research. And it just it puts you on the steep part of the learning curve as long as you want to be there. So it's actually really fun.
Yeah, I spoke to a guest recently, and he was on a 3-hour road trip on his own, and he just spent about 3 hours talking to ChatGPT, drilling down onto a particular topic he wanted to learn about, and then asked him to provide a PDF of all the main points and everything. So just something simple like that makes it so easy to pick up information. But back to LogicMonitor, before I let you go, anyone listening, they want to find out more about Edwin AI that we mentioned today, the work you're doing at LogicMonitor, or connect with you or your team. Where's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, we've got a fairly packed kind of annual calendar when you think about it. I've been here about 6 months, so I got the tail end of kind of what our annual calendar looks like. But there's a bunch of us that are going to be at reInvent next week. Excited, it's one of the largest tech conferences in North America, and so we'll have a lot of our team there. I know we've got lots of meetings lined up with customers and partners. That's exciting. I'm Garth.Fort at LogicMonitor.com if you want to meet with me at reInvent. hit me up today or tomorrow because my diary's filling up quickly, but we'll have a lot of people there who can do that. We also have a series of events that we run around the world for customers called Elevate. So we did one in Dallas and London and Sydney this year, and we'll kind of do that again next year. But we also have any industry event that you think of. Gartner's got a conference the week after AWS in Las Vegas. Our CEO, Christina, is going to be at Davos in January, and we've got, people all over the world. So we're a global company and we're engaged with customer events nearly continuously. So, I thrive on spending time with customers and partners. I spent nearly a decade kind of in the field, kind of in a product role, but, in a customer facing capacity, and I know that the truth really lives in the customer. And so I look for every opportunity I can to spend time with customers, whether that's, at events that we own and operate like Elevate, or at a big event like AWS. I think those are great opportunities to come meet with us and figure out kind of what we're thinking and, tell us how to shape the way we're thinking in a way that can help you solve problems better. So.
Awesome. Well, I will add links to everything you mentioned there. I'll also be keeping a lookout for you because I too will be at AWS reInvent next week. So it'd be great to meet face to face. And more than anything, I've just loved hearing more about your story, the journey you've been on, and why AI native observability is the next frontier in enterprise IT, and also how LogicMonitor is positioning itself at the forefront. So much gold in your answers today, but just thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Neil. I'll be at the Venetian and then spending a lot of time in the wind, etc. We'll be running around Vegas together. Hopefully we can find a time to meet face to face. Thank you for the time today. This has been fun.
So a big thank you to Garth. I genuinely enjoyed our conversation today, from his journey through Microsoft, AWS and Splunk to the work he's now leading at LogicMonitor. I think for me, it was fascinating to hear how these experiences are shaping his approach to AI native observability and evolving role of IT operations. And his perspective on Edwin AI and the rise of intelligent agents, I think, brings real clarity to a topic that many organisations are still trying to make sense of, whether it is reducing alert fatigue, improving root cause analysis, or merely supporting teams through this phase of automation. It's clear that this shift is about enabling people rather than replacing them. And I also appreciate his honest take on enterprise IT spend, governance challenges, and the balance between innovation and legacy systems. Because these are the very real issues facing leaders right now. And his insights help bring structure and perspective to a very complex landscape. So a big thank you to my guest time, but over to everybody listening. I want to hear from you now. You are a big part of the Tech Talks Daily and Tech Talks Network community. So pop over to techtalksnetwork.com, record an audio message, let me know your thoughts and takeaways and perspectives that you have, or simply send me a message on LinkedIn, X or Instagram. Just at Neil C. Hughes. But it's time for me to go now. I'll be back again tomorrow with another guest, but thank you as always for listening, and I'll speak with you again tomorrow. Bye for now.